The flame trembles. A soft wind moves through the dark, rattling the old windows, brushing against the thin walls of a quiet room, and still, it burns. Not because it's unshaken, but because something in it refuses to go out. Maybe your life has felt like that lately. Like you're one gust away from giving up, like something invisible is pressing on you, and you're not sure how much longer you can keep standing. The truth is, fear has a voice. And some mornings, it whispers before you've even opened your eyes. It tells you everything could fall apart. It tells you you're not enough, or that the worst thing that happened to you will always define you. It tells you it's too late to change. That the silence in your prayer life means God has stopped listening. But faith has a voice too. And it doesn't shout over the storm. It simply says, stay. It says, try again. It says, God is not finished with you yet. Faith doesn't mean you stop being afraid. It means you choose to keep walking, even if your knees are shaking. And today, I want to remind you of something so simple and so powerful. We often forget it when life gets heavy. Fear may knock, but you don't have to answer, because faith will always stand at the door too. Fear may knock, but faith answers the door. Fear doesn't always show up like a monster. Sometimes it slips in quietly, dressed like logic. It says, be careful when you're trying to take a risk. It says, what if it goes wrong? Right when you start hoping it might go right, it tells you to wait. Wait for the perfect timing. Wait for the confidence to show up. Wait until you're not scared anymore. But if you keep waiting for the fear to go away, you'll be waiting your whole life. The world is full of voices, internal and external, telling you to play it safe. Maybe you've heard them before. Maybe you're hearing them right now. That moment before you speak up in a meeting, before you sign the application, before you tell someone the truth about your heart, before you let go of something that's been breaking you in half. That moment where everything inside you says, don't, it's too risky. You might fail. You might get rejected. You might be laughed at. You might not be enough. But here's the thing. God never called you to live a life ruled by fear. He didn't knit you together in your mother's womb only for you to spend your whole life hiding from the world He placed you in. He didn't walk with David into battle only to tell you now, maybe this one's too big. He didn't calm the storm at sea so that you'd build a life on dry land and never step out again. He didn't send His only Son to die for you just so you'd spend the rest of your days apologizing for being here. Let's be clear. Fear is part of the journey, but it is not the guide. In Isaiah 41:10, God doesn't say, don't feel afraid, as if fear were a sin or weakness. He says, do not be afraid, for I am with you. In other words, fear may be present, but it is not in charge. You're not walking alone, and you never were. There's a moment in the Psalms, Psalm 56:3, when David, a man who fought lions and giants, says something deeply human. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. Not if, not once I'm no longer afraid, but when. Which means the presence of fear is not evidence of a lack of faith. It's a chance to exercise it. That changes everything. That means you don't need to wait to feel bold before you take the next step. You don't need to feel fearless to start the thing that scares you. You don't need your knees to stop shaking before you speak what's in your heart. You don't even need to see the finish line. You just need to trust that God sees it and that He's already gone ahead of you. Winston Churchill once said, fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. And for many of us, courage doesn't look like battle cries and victory speeches. Sometimes courage is just getting out of bed after a week of wondering if you matter. Sometimes it's picking up the phone. Sometimes it's not giving up on prayer when your heart feels dry and your hope feels thin. Sometimes it's whispering, God, I need you one more time. Fear says, you failed too many times. You're not qualified. Faith says, let go. Try again. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And right now, there may be something in your life that feels too big to face. Maybe it's a decision you've been putting off. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's the unknown of a diagnosis, a financial crisis, or a relationship that feels like it's hanging by a thread. Maybe it's the fear that you'll never feel whole again after the loss you suffered. But what if I told you that fear is loudest just before faith takes the lead? What if the trembling you feel is not weakness, but the exact moment God wants to meet you with His strength? Because that's what He does. He meets us not when we've got it all figured out, but when we're honest enough to say, God, I don't, but I'll follow you anyway. He meets us in the middle of the shaking, not after it. He speaks in the storm. He shows up in the furnace. He walks on water, not when it's calm, but when the waves are wild. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. And maybe that's the most powerful thing you could do today. Not run from the fear, not numb it, not ignore it, but face it and speak the name of the one who holds the authority over it, Jesus. There is no fear that has ever entered your life that He didn't already know about. No anxiety you've carried that He hasn't offered to hold. No future you're afraid of that He isn't already present in. And so when fear knocks, you have a choice. You can let it in. You can build your life around its voice, or you can open the door with faith. Even if your voice trembles, even if your hands shake, even if your heart isn't sure yet. Because faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a whisper, I'm going anyway. Sometimes faith looks like one small act of obedience, one brave conversation, one prayer when your heart doesn't feel like praying, one moment of believing God's word over your own fears. So if you woke up today and fear met you first, you're not broken, you're human, but you're also more than that. You are chosen, you are equipped, and you are not walking alone. The same God who split the sea is still the God who walks you through your Monday mornings. The same Jesus who calmed the storm is still the one who whispers peace to your anxiety. The same Spirit that raised Him from the dead is alive in you, and that means nothing is too far gone, and no fear is too big to face. Let the candle flicker. Let the storm shake the walls. You're still here. And if you're still here, it means God's not finished yet.
You're braver than you feel when you trust God more than you fear the outcome. Courage isn't a feeling, it's a choice made in the middle of fear. That might sound like a contradiction, but it's not. It's the hidden truth behind every meaningful act of faith. Because most of the time, bravery doesn't show up wearing a cape. It shows up in your life disguised as a trembling yes. It looks like driving to a job interview after your confidence was shattered in the last one. Like standing in line at a rehab center, wondering if anyone will ever respect you again. Like getting on your knees in a quiet chapel. Not because your faith is strong, but because something inside you still refuses to give up on grace. The bravest people aren't always the loudest. They're often the ones no one sees, the ones who still show up while afraid, the ones who keep choosing hope when every voice inside them says they should stop. I want to tell you about one of those people. Her name is Leah. She's 38 years old. She lives in Johannesburg, South Africa. A few years ago, Leah lost her job. She was working in the billing department at a large transportation company. Steady pay, long hours, no backup plan. One day, the layoffs came, and her name was on the list. No severance, Just a folder, a handshake, and a quiet exit. That was it. She went home to 2 kids, 1 light bulb flickering in the hallway, and a fridge with only enough food for 2 days. She said it felt like her entire identity had been stripped. Not just the income, but the feeling of purpose, of stability, of being able to provide. And with that came a fear she didn't recognize. A fear so loud she could barely sleep. A fear that whispered, "You failed them. You'll never come back from this. This is who you are now." But something inside Leah wouldn't let go. She applied to dozens of jobs. She heard nothing. Days turned into weeks, and the voices of fear only grew stronger. So one day she walked into a community learning center, sat down across from a guidance counselor, and said, "I need to learn something new." She didn't know what. She didn't know how. But she knew she had to move. She had to act. She had to trust that taking even one step was better than letting the fear decide who she'd become. That's how she ended up enrolling in night school to study logistics. Every morning she'd get the kids ready. Every afternoon she'd clean houses for barely enough to cover transport and tuition. And every evening she'd sit in a classroom lit by fluorescent lights, eyes heavy, heart heavier, but there. She said most nights she wanted to quit. Not because she didn't care, but because the fear kept trying to win. "You're too old. You'll never catch up. What's the point?" But Leah kept showing up. She kept whispering small prayers in the quiet, on buses and bathrooms, during breaks. "God, walk with me." That was all she said. That was all she had. And 4 years later, Leah walked into an interview at a freight company. A man on the panel looked up, read her name, paused, and said, "Didn't you used to work in billing at Grayport?" She nodded. He smiled. "I remember you. You were the one who always stayed late." She got the job, and not just that. 1 year later, she was promoted. Leah now manages the very team that once told her goodbye. That's what faith does. Not in one leap, not in one miracle, but in one trembling yes at a time. In showing up when no one is watching. In choosing obedience over outcome. In trusting that the God who gives you the desire to change is the same God who will sustain you through the process. Leah's story isn't rare because it's spectacular. It's rare because it happened beneath the surface. Because most people never see the courage it takes to keep going when no one is clapping. Because society often celebrates success, but overlooks the sacredness of perseverance. But God sees it all. He sees the exhausted mom studying by candlelight, the recovering addict saying no for the 100th time, the grieving soul walking into church one more time, the anxious man showing up to work despite the panic, the teenager choosing not to give up on themselves. He sees every step you take in faith, even when it feels like you're moving through fog. And maybe today, the fog hasn't lifted for you yet. Maybe you're still waiting for a breakthrough. Maybe your story hasn't turned yet. And the temptation is strong to believe the fear, to let it wrap around your identity, to believe that just because you're scared, you're not strong. Just because you don't see the results yet, you're not moving forward. But I want to remind you, you are not your fear. You are not your circumstances. You are not your mistakes. You are a child of God. And that means you carry a power far beyond your feelings. There's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that says, faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. And if that's where you are, just taking the next step without knowing how it ends, please hear this. That is faith. That is courage. That is holy. Don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait for the fear to disappear. Don't wait for every light to turn green. Start now. Move with what you've got. And trust that God is not waiting at the finish line. He's walking with you in every unsure step. There's another quote I've always held close on the hard days. It's from Mary Ann Radmacher. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. Maybe that's what you need today, not a breakthrough, but the decision to try again, to stand up, to believe that this season will not break you, that the waiting is not wasted, that the fear does not win. The Bible reminds us of this truth again and again. In Deuteronomy 31:6, Moses tells the people of Israel, Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. That verse wasn't said to fearless warriors. It was said to a people afraid to move forward. A people facing a land full of giants, wondering how they could ever step into what was promised. And Moses doesn't tell them to be brave on their own. He doesn't say, You've got this. He says, God's got you. That's a big difference. Because if you're walking into something unknown right now, a new season, a job loss, a health scare, a leap of faith, you don't have to pretend to be fearless. You just have to know you're not alone. So maybe you're like Leah. Maybe you're in the middle of your night school season. The part of the story that no one sees. The part where everything feels uphill and you wonder if it's worth it. If that's you, I want you to know this matters. Your steps matter. Your small wins matter. Your prayers, whispered in the dark, are not forgotten. Your obedience, when the outcome isn't clear, is seen by heaven. You are braver than you feel. You are more capable than your fear suggests. And you are being strengthened in ways you cannot yet see. One day, you'll look back at this moment and realize this is where your courage grew. This is where your faith got real. Not because it was easy, but because you chose to keep walking when you could have stopped. And that's what God builds on. So today, let's stop waiting for the fear to vanish. Let's stop believing that being afraid disqualifies us from our calling. Let's remember that every story of breakthrough once started with someone who was afraid, but moved anyway. Maybe that someone is you. And maybe this is the moment you'll look back on and say, that was the day I decided to keep going. That was the day I said yes, not to fear, but to faith. So go ahead, take the next step, make the call, write the application, pray the prayer, send the message, begin again. Because courage isn't about waiting for the fear to go away. It's about trusting that the God who called you is stronger than anything trying to stop you. Faith over fear, every time.
Storms don't mean you're off course. They mean you're in deep water with Jesus. Sometimes the worst part of a storm isn't the storm itself. It's the way it makes you question everything. You start asking yourself if you misunderstood the call, if maybe you took a wrong turn, if all those prayers, all that effort, all that faith somehow led you straight into the chaos you were trying to avoid. You wonder, did I miss God? Is this punishment? Did I take a step when I should have stayed still? But what if storms aren't proof that you're off course? What if sometimes they're confirmation that you're right where you need to be, because Jesus is walking in it with you? That's not how most of us expect faith to work. We hope that believing will mean smoother roads, fewer breakdowns, clearer skies. We think faith is supposed to shield us from the mess. But look at the Gospels, and you'll notice something surprising. Some of the most faith-filled moments happen in storms. The sea wasn't calm when Peter stepped out of the boat. The wind didn't stop when Jesus first started walking on water. The storm didn't pause for their courage. It pushed against it. And Jesus didn't rush to still it. He walked right through it. That tells us something profound. It tells us that faith doesn't eliminate the waves. It just gives us someone to hold on to in the middle of them. I want to tell you a story about a man named Miguel. He's 52. He lives in Cadiz, a coastal town in southern Spain. He's been a fisherman for most of his life, born into it, like his father before him. The ocean was always his compass. He could read the tides better than he could read a map. Every day before the sun rose, he'd be out there, alone on the water, hands steady on the wheel, heart at peace. Until one night, everything changed. Miguel had taken the boat out later than usual. A storm had been forecast, but the radar showed it skirting the coast. So he went anyway. Just a short trip, just a few nets. But storms don't always listen to forecasts. The wind picked up fast. The sea turned. Before he could anchor back, the sky opened and the water swallowed the light. He lost the boat. He made it back, but barely. And for a long time after that, Miguel didn't return to the water, not because of injury, because of fear, because of the voices in his head that kept telling him he'd failed, that he was reckless, that he was too old to recover from a mistake like that, that he should have seen it coming. He lost more than a boat that night. He lost the trust he'd always had in himself. And in the silence that followed, he started to believe that maybe God had turned his face away. He stayed home, grew quiet. The laughter left. The community noticed. They tried to help. But grief mixed with shame is a hard combination to untangle. The man who once taught young boys how to throw nets now avoided the pier altogether. But something happened that no one expected. Miguel's parish was running a food pantry out of the back of the church, and they were short on volunteers. His neighbor, an older woman who used to trade fish with his father, knocked on his door and asked him to come. "You can carry boxes," she said. "That's all. Just show up." He did. That first day, he barely spoke, but he came again and again. And somewhere between stacking crates and wiping counters, something softened. One afternoon, he stayed behind to sweep the hall and found himself sitting on a bench beneath a statue of Christ, staring up at that familiar outstretched hand. He said nothing, but he stayed. A week later, he helped fix a broken fridge in the back room. Then he brought coffee for the team. Eventually, he joined the men's prayer group. He started opening up about the storm, about the shame, about how he thought his purpose had been swallowed by the sea. And in that room, full of men who had faced their own storms, divorce, addiction, betrayal, loss, he realized he was not alone, not in the storm, not in the fear, and definitely not in the redemption. Miguel never returned to fishing full time, but he started something new. He now runs a mentorship group for young men in Cadiz, teaching them discipline, respect, and how to navigate the emotional storms no one talks about. He says, if God let you sink, it's only so you'd learn to swim in faith. And maybe that's what storms are for, not to destroy you, but to deliver you into deeper waters with God. Waters where you stop relying on your own strength. Waters where you realize that even if the boat breaks, Jesus still walks. That even if you feel like you're going under, His hand is never too far to reach you. There's a line I've carried for years from John Ortberg, who once wrote, "Peace is not found in the absence of storms, but in the presence of Christ." That changes the question we ask in hard times. Instead of, why is this happening to me? We begin to ask, where is Jesus in this? And when you start looking, not with panic, but with expectation, you begin to see His fingerprints in places you thought were abandoned, in the friend who calls right when you need them, in the Bible verse that finds you in the middle of the night, in the quiet strength to get through another day, in the stranger who offers unexpected kindness, in the memory that comes back just in time to remind you who you are. Miguel's life didn't go back to what it was, but that's not always the goal. Sometimes God isn't calling us backward. He's calling us forward into something unfamiliar. And often storms are what prepare us for that calling. They strip away the noise. They reveal what we built our foundation on. They make us reach for the anchor we forgot we had. And in those moments, it's easy to forget our worth, to think we're being punished, to believe that faith means we should be protected from pain. But Scripture reminds us otherwise. In Mark 4:39, Jesus rebukes the wind and says to the waves, "Quiet, be still," and the storm listens. But before he spoke those words, before the sea calmed, he asked his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Notice that he didn't say they shouldn't have fear. He questioned why their fear was louder than their faith. That's a question worth sitting with. What voices have been louder than your faith lately? Maybe it's the voice of doubt, telling you that you'll never be healed. The voice of comparison, whispering that you're behind. The voice of past mistakes, trying to define your future. Or the voice of perfectionism, convincing you that unless everything looks right, you're not enough. But here's what storms can teach us if we let them. The voice of God is always stronger than the wind. And sometimes the storm is where we finally get quiet enough to hear Him. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it." Some of us are carrying the weight of storms we were never meant to hold alone. We're trying to keep it all together, to make it look like we're fine, to keep our heads up while our hearts are drowning. But God doesn't ask you to carry it all. He asks you to bring it all to Him. And He's not disappointed that you're tired. He's not ashamed that you're afraid. In fact, He specializes in meeting people right there, in the exhaustion, in the breaking point, in the deep water. So if you're in a storm right now, hear this. You are not off course. You are not being punished. You are not alone. You're just in deep water with Jesus. And that's not a reason to panic. That's a reason to praise. Because the deeper the water, the more clearly you see the hand that holds you. And maybe like Miguel, your story won't return to what it once was. Maybe it will become something better, something quieter, something deeper, something that no one else sees, but that God will use in ways you couldn't imagine. Maybe your purpose isn't being delayed. Maybe it's being reshaped, not on the calm days, but right here in the chaos, right here in the wind, right here in the part of the story you never wanted to live. So breathe and don't give up. You're not drowning, you're learning how to depend. And dependence on God isn't weakness. It's the beginning of real strength. Let the storm come. Let it shake what isn't anchored. Let it uncover the idols, the distractions, the false confidence. Because what will remain when all else is shaken will be the part of you that truly trusts. That's what deep water does. It doesn't destroy faith. It reveals it. It doesn't cancel purpose. It clarifies it. It doesn't remove you from God's plan. It takes you to the very center of it. So when the waves rise and your footing feels unsure, just remember, He is there. And He isn't pacing the shore. He's walking on the water. And He's looking at you with eyes full of knowing, full of love, and full of power that no storm can silence.
Faith is built in the waiting, not just the winning. There's a kind of silence that feels like a weight, not peaceful, not calm, just heavy. The kind that creeps into your chest after too many days of praying and not hearing anything back. The kind that shows up after you've done everything right, but nothing changes. The kind of silence that starts to echo with questions you're scared to say out loud. Did God forget me? Did I mishear him? Was this all a mistake? Waiting has a way of making time feel thick. You wake up, do the things, say the prayers, go through the motions, and still, it's like standing still while the world moves forward without you. You scroll past people who seem to be living in fast forward while your life feels frozen on pause. Their doors open while yours remain shut. Their breakthroughs come while you're still whispering, Lord, how much longer? We don't talk enough about the ache of waiting, about how it doesn't just test your patience, it tests your identity. It makes you wonder if you've been overlooked, if everyone else got the map and you somehow missed it. It makes the lie feel louder. If it hasn't happened yet, maybe it never will. But Scripture tells a different story about waiting. It doesn't paint it as punishment, it paints it as preparation. There's a line in Lamentations 3:25 that says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him." That isn't just poetic, it's a promise, a truth whispered into the heart of those who feel stuck. Because waiting seasons may feel still on the surface, but underneath, something sacred is unfolding. I want to tell you about someone who understands that kind of wait. Her name is Eleni. She's 64, retired, and lives in Athens, Greece. But her real story isn't about work, it's about her daughter. 20 years ago, Eleni's only child left home after a brutal argument. There had been tension for years, differences in beliefs, lifestyle, choices, but that final conversation ended in slammed doors and broken words. Her daughter moved across the country. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just distance. At first, Eleni was too proud to reach out, but as weeks turned to months, then years, pride gave way to heartbreak. She started writing letters, dozens of them. She didn't know where to send them, so she kept them in a drawer. She wrote as if her daughter would one day come home and ask to read them all. Some were apologies, some were prayers, some just said, "I love you." Still, every birthday, Eleni baked the same cake she used to make for her as a child. She'd light one candle, say one prayer, then sit in the kitchen alone, imagining what forgiveness might sound like if it ever walked through the door. Some Sundays she couldn't bring herself to go to church, not because she didn't believe, but because she believed so much it hurt. She believed God could restore anything, but he hadn't restored this. And waiting that long for a miracle starts to feel like holding your breath for years. Still, she waited. She prayed rosaries in the quiet, lit candles in cathedrals, looked for her daughter's face in every crowd. She didn't know if reconciliation would ever come, but she chose to live like it might. And then, last Christmas, a letter arrived. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. "I read something you wrote years ago. I found it in a book. I'm not ready to talk about everything, but I have a son now. He's 5. His name is Andreas, and I think he should meet his grandmother." Eleni cried on the floor of her living room for almost an hour. That January, her daughter came home for the first time in 20 years. The visit was quiet, careful, full of pauses, but also full of grace. And when her grandson ran through the door and into her arms, Eleni whispered a prayer, not for what had returned, but for what had been built in her heart while she waited. Because here's the truth. Waiting can be holy ground. It doesn't feel like it. Most of the time, it just feels like nothing is happening. But God isn't passive in the waiting. He's working in ways we can't see, changing hearts, preparing timing, aligning things you don't even know are out of place. Sometimes the delay isn't about you being unready. Sometimes it's about everything else getting into position. Christine Kane once said, Sometimes God's delays are not his denials, they're his preparations. That line has stuck with me for years. Because when you're in it, it's hard to separate delay from rejection. It's hard not to take the silence personally. But what if the silence is actually space? Space for your heart to grow. Space for your faith to stretch. Space for God to build something better than what you were asking for. Emily Dickinson wrote, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul." Hope doesn't crash through the ceiling. It doesn't come with fireworks. It perches quietly, gently, like a presence that doesn't leave, even when the skies go dark. Faith lives there too, in that quiet perch, in the kind of belief that says, even if I can't see it, I will still believe. That kind of faith doesn't develop during the celebration. It's forged in the wait. You don't become strong by winning. You become strong by staying, by not giving up when every reason says you should, by choosing trust when the timeline goes blank. The problem is, we often confuse movement with progress. We think, if I'm not getting somewhere, I must be doing something wrong. But what if the stillness is God's design? What if the slow season isn't punishment, but pruning? What if he's cutting back what's unnecessary to grow something deeper in you? When we look at the heroes of faith, we often forget how long they waited. Abraham waited decades for Isaac. Joseph waited years in a prison cell. Hannah waited in grief and barrenness. David was anointed as king, then sent back to the pasture, and later hunted in caves for years before he wore the crown. And Jesus himself? 30 years of quiet obedience before his public ministry began. Even after the resurrection, he waited 40 days before the ascension, and still waiting now patiently for the fullness of redemption. He knows what waiting feels like. And if Jesus could trust the timing of the Father, so can we. But we need to change how we see waiting. It's not sitting still with your hands tied. It's standing firm with your eyes on heaven. It's not twiddling your thumbs. It's tending the soil. It's doing what you can with what you have while trusting that God is doing what only He can do. Some of the strongest people I know aren't the ones with impressive stories. They're the ones who are still in the middle of the story, still showing up, still trusting, still saying, God, I don't get it, but I'm here. I'm not walking away. That kind of strength is rare, but it's real. And if you're in a season like that now, a season of waiting, I want to say something clearly. You are not behind. You are being built. You're not forgotten. You're being fortified. The waiting may feel long, but so does the sunrise until it happens. So does the harvest until it comes. So does forgiveness until it shows up at your front door holding your grandson's hand. And when it does come, when the healing breaks through, or the door finally opens, or the miracle arrives, you'll know. You'll know that it wasn't wasted. That every quiet day of showing up, every prayer prayed with no reply, every moment you chose to hope instead of harden, it mattered. It still matters. You're planting seeds in a soil you might not see bloom for years, but you're planting anyway. And God is the Lord of the harvest. So hold on. Maybe the wind hasn't come yet. Maybe the door hasn't opened. Maybe the answer is still on the way. But faith is right here. Faith is the decision to stay faithful in the dark, to keep lighting candles, to keep writing letters, even if they live in a drawer, to keep baking birthday cakes for someone who hasn't come home yet, because God sees the faith it takes to wait, and He never wastes it. Your faith doesn't have to be perfect, just pointed toward God. If you're waiting for your faith to be flawless before you move, you'll be waiting forever. Because faith was never about having all the right words, the perfect confidence, or the absence of doubt. It was always about direction, about the posture of your heart, about who you turn to, even when your hands are shaking, your voice is cracking, and your heart doesn't feel brave. Some days, faith looks like praise. Other days, it looks like survival. And there are days, quiet, hidden days, when faith is just whispering help into the silence. Not sure if anything will change, but still choosing to speak. That's where grace lives. Not in the grand gestures, not in the flawless prayers, but in the raw, unpolished honesty of a heart that refuses to quit. I want to tell you about Tobias. He's 21 years old and lives in Berlin. And for most of his teenage years, Tobias wore two faces. On the outside, he was confident, funny, quick-witted, always the loudest voice in the room. But inside, he was crumbling. He carried anxiety like an uninvited shadow, and over time, that weight led to addiction. Not the kind that people easily notice, but the quiet kind, the hidden kind. The kind you build a life around so no one has to see the cracks. By the time he was 19, Tobias had burned bridges with family, lost friends, and dropped out of school. He wasn't reckless because he didn't care. He was reckless because he didn't know how to ask for help. And one winter night, in the middle of another spiral, he walked through the streets of Berlin with nothing but the clothes on his back and a sinking sense that maybe this was all life would ever be. That night, he passed an old church. The lights were off, but the door was open. He stepped inside, not because he was looking for God, but because he was looking for somewhere warm. He sat in the back pew, pulled his hoodie over his head, and stared at the floor. And there, in the dark, with no one watching, no music playing, no words prepared, he lit a candle and whispered just one word: help. That was it. Nothing more. But something shifted. He didn't feel fireworks. He didn't suddenly become a different person, but for the first time in years, he felt seen, not judged, not fixed, just seen. He went back the next day, and the next, not always to pray, just to sit, to breathe, to let something holy touch something wounded. A few weeks later, he joined a recovery group, then a community center. He met a counselor, got clean. He enrolled in night classes, started studying theology of all things, not because he wanted to be a preacher, but because he wanted to understand the God who stayed with him when everyone else walked away. Today, Tobias is 5 years sober. He leads a small discussion group for young men struggling with addiction, and when they ask him how he started to heal, he always smiles and says, "I stopped trying to be impressive. I just asked for help." That's faith, not polished, not perfect, just pointed in the right direction. You see, we often think faith has to be loud, that it has to be big, that it has to look like certainty. But Jesus never asked for performance. He asked for trust. In Matthew 17:20, he says, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." He doesn't say when your faith is huge or when you feel bold. He says, if you have faith, even the tiniest amount, that means your fear doesn't cancel your faith. Your doubts don't disqualify your purpose. Your mistakes don't unmake your calling. What matters is where you bring it. Bring your confusion, your questions, your exhaustion. Bring your barely holding on version of belief. Because God is not looking for perfect people. He's looking for honest hearts. And when you come to Him, whether you're standing tall or crawling in, He receives you. Every time. There's a line from Henri Nouwen that has always stayed with me. The opposite of faith is not doubt, but despair. In other words, your questions are not a betrayal. They're an invitation to bring your uncertainty into the presence of God and to let Him hold what you can't carry. And when you do, When you turn your face toward Him, even if your heart is full of hesitation, that's enough. That's faith. It's not the absence of fear. It's choosing to keep going even with it. Sometimes it looks like lighting a candle in an empty church, returning to prayer after weeks of silence, or telling someone the truth for the first time. Sometimes it looks like just making it through the day without giving up. All of that is sacred. All of that is seen. And none of that goes unnoticed by heaven. So if you've been holding back because you think your faith isn't strong enough, come closer. If you've been walking with shame because your journey has been messy, come closer. If you've been afraid to pray because you don't know what to say, come closer. Jesus never turned away the fragile. He never rejected the questioning. He never asked for perfection. He only said, "Follow me." So take the step, light the candle, say the prayer, ask for help. You don't need to have it all together. You just need to bring what you have. Because when you bring your small to God, He does something miraculous with it. If you've made it to this point, I want to say something to you. From one human soul to another, you faced more than people know. You've kept going on days you wanted to quit. You've prayed prayers that felt like whispers. You've waited in silence. You've walked through storms. You've lived with fear and still chosen faith. You don't need to wait until you're stronger to believe that God is with you. He already is, right now, right here. Not just watching from a distance, but walking beside you, steady, faithful, patient, kind. So take this with you as you face today. Your faith doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't even have to be confident. It just has to be pointed toward Him. Because even the smallest flicker of faith, when held out in trust, can light up the darkest room.